So today we are going to take a look at The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis. This book is a little outside my wheelhouse in terms of what I normally read because while it is nonfiction, it is narrative in its structure. Uh, I think this is the first Michael Lewis book I've read to completion. I think there was one I read a little bit of early college years, The Big Short. But I enjoyed what this book was about immensely, which is about the lives of two psychologists, Israeli psychologists, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. And their work went on to win the Nobel Prize in economics, not psychology, which should raise an eyebrow. Uh, what their work was largely about was about how people make decisions. One of the assumptions of economics is that people are rational, and Tversky and Kahneman showed that people often make errors, and it's not just an error of them just missing the point, but these errors are systematic, and humans will in general make the same type of error, which implies that we're not actually rational in the way economists like to use in their models. So an example is we are $5 should be $5 to a person, no matter if they're gaining it or losing it. But people will dramatically overvalue losing $5 relative to gaining $5. That is, they will be much more motivated to avoid losing money than they will be motivated to earn money. There's a lot of these that Tversky and Kahneman uncovered, which is why, well, spoilers a little bit, Kahneman went on to win the Nobel Prize. Uh, and these ideas, I think, are really important. And so Michael Lewis wrote a book about the two people who uncovered a lot of these ideas, the two psychologists. And so the subject material I find very fascinating. He interposes a lot of their research into the story of these two men, which I found was interesting. He also juxtaposes them a lot. He might engage in some degree of stylization in painting them, in painting Tversky as being the more gregarious, straightforward type, and Kahneman as being the more introspective worrier, just because they contrast well. But I found the book very interesting, and I might be quite biased because Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is one of my favorite books. I think it's on my top 10 list. I can't imagine it's not. So, let's get into the ratings a little bit. Because it is narrative in structure, there's not a tremendous amount to relate in regards to the ideas. So for utility, I gave it a 5. Knowing about these cognitive biases, I actually think has a lot of utility, but for the most part, it's a narrative, and the book is fairly long. If you wanted just the ideas on cognitive biases, I would recommend Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and perhaps the utility of this book should be even higher, considering Michael Lewis does weave in a lot of the ideas, but I gave it a 5. For entertainment, I gave it an 8.5. I found it very entertaining, but that might be because I'm partial to Kahneman, and so maybe this is too high, and utility is too low, perhaps. But I gave it an 8.5. I found it very entertaining. I found Michael Lewis's style invigorating. He opens up with something that's not even about the two, but ties in really well. He talks about the Houston Rockets and Moneyball and how he wrote a book called Moneyball, which is about how the Billy Beane started using economic ideas and numbers to inform decisions in regards to GMing a baseball team, and he put together a very strong team with a very little amount of money. And since then, there's been a bit of a revolution in the way people approach putting together teams, is that they rely much more on statistics and much less on human evaluation, which has been shown to be not very good. And the reason it's not very good is because of a lot of the ideas that Kahneman and Tversky exposed. So he opens up talking about Moneyball and says he like kind of missed when he was writing Moneyball. He missed out on Kahneman's ideas, and they perhaps he should have paid more attention to them. Anyways, so for interest, I gave it an 8. I think that the topic's extremely interesting. He does not always talk about cognitive biases, but it's hearing about them and then also hearing about how Kahneman and Tversky came together because they're so dissimilar in terms of people, and then they worked together for a very long time. Is very interesting. For novelty, I gave it a 6.5. I think so. Normally, narratives don't score high on novelty at all because usually, if you're not exposed to them, it's not as big a deal. I think because they're not as information rich. But I think that this book is fairly information rich, because just being aware that there are these types of cognitive biases out there is I think has a lot of value. Um, like I'm not going to give more examples right now because I think it detracts a little bit. So for style, I gave it a 9. I really like the way Michael Lewis writes. I was very pleasantly surprised. For readability, I gave it a 6.5. I think that it was pretty easy to read. There's some like complex ideas, so at times it can be, or not really that difficult, but it's not necessarily. It doesn't flow as much like a story. Sometimes. And for difficulty, I gave it a 6. So overall, that gave it a pretty high score of a 7.07. In general, I recommend Thinking Fast and Slow quite often, and I would kind of lump this book together with that one in terms of how I would think about recommending it to others. In general, if people don't read a lot of nonfiction or they don't like nonfiction, and I think that learning about cognitive biases would be important to them, I would recommend this book pretty highly. If someone reads a lot of nonfiction, I wouldn't recommend this book as much as I would Thinking Fast and Slow. I just kind of think of them kind of interchangeably in terms of ideas that they're giving you. Just Thinking Fast and Slow is giving you a lot more substance and a lot less style, and this is giving you a lot more style and a lot less substance. Is kind of a way to think about it. If someone asked me for an interesting book, and I knew that they read a lot of fiction instead of nonfiction, I would probably recommend. I'd probably recommend this book. Just in terms of, I don't want to give them something that's too far away from what they're used to or what their wheelhouse is in terms of their interest, because just reading a nonfiction book, just jumping into it, can be a little daunting, from what I understand. I've always been a nonfiction type of person, so yeah, and I mean I'd recommend. I imagine moving forward, I'm going to recommend this book quite a lot. I'm excited to probably take a look at Michael Lewis's other books. Probably Moneyball next, or maybe The Big Short. I'm not sure. I liked his writing a lot, and he's writing about interesting ideas. It is a bit on the narrative side, so I probably won't read them all back to back or anything like that because I like nonfiction. But surprisingly strong synthesis of both good narrative and interesting ideas. I was pleasantly surprised. I was thinking that this book wouldn't mention any of the ideas of Kahneman and Tversky at all. And one more thing I'd like to include that I thought was amusing was there was a university professor when talking about Tversky. So one of the things about Tversky is he's really smart. Said that they made an intelligence test, and there's only one question on the test, or there's only one data point, and it's how long it takes you when you are in a conversation with Tversky to realize that he's smarter than you, and the shorter the time, the smarter you are. Which I thought that tidbit was incredibly amusing. So if you realize he's smarter way faster, you must be pretty smart yourself. In terms of discussion, or if you like this video, comment, like, subscribe. In terms of discussion, any of the cognitive biases are fairly interesting, but perhaps focusing on why is it that we consider a loss of the same amount much more problematic than a gain. I know recently my car was broken into and some of my stuff got stolen, and it was not a lot of money worth of stuff, but part of it is it's annoying that someone's like violating your personal property. But in terms of the amount that was stolen, it was very little, and if I was given the opportunity to try and get that amount of money, I wouldn't like jump or be anywhere near as emotionally aroused, I guess, as someone taking it from me. So, any examples of a loss being treated as more substantive than a gain would make for interesting comments. Anyways.